Right now, you're listening to me on the Shure SM7DB. So let's find out if that DB stands for do buy or don't buy. Now, to be totally honest, this video is taking quite a turn from what I originally planned. So I'm going to give you all of my conclusions and all the spoilers right up front, and then we can dive into how I got there and do some comparisons and that sort of thing. So if you're unfamiliar with it, the SM7DB is an update to the Shure SM7B, a pretty legendary microphone that's been around for a very long time. It is essentially the exact same microphone, except that it has a built-in booster that provides an additional 28 decibels of clean gain when connected to phantom power. You can totally bypass that booster, so it's exactly like the classic SM7B, or you can use 18 or 28 decibels of gain with the built-in booster. Now that comes at a price which is $100 more expensive, so this has an MSRP of $499. This has an MSRP of $399. I definitely think this is too expensive. And there are a few cosmetic changes you can probably maybe notice. The housing here is a little bit more shiny and glossy compared to the matte housing of the original SM7B. And on the back, we do have some changes with the buttons and the switches. So now on the SM7DB, in addition to the bass cut and the presence boost that's always been on the microphone, you do have the ability then to turn on and off the preamp and choose 18 or 28 decibels of gain. And they also updated it to be switches you can flip with your fingers instead of needing to use like a little tool to switch on here, which is cool. Although, to be honest, how often are you really switching those things anyway? I know in all of the years I've been using SM7Bs, I usually use them on the flat profile anyway. So it is a cool little update. It's a nice little quality of life feature, but it's definitely nothing worth upgrading over. And in addition to being shinier on the side, you also have the Shure logo, which I'm sure glad is not as bright and bold as it is on something like the Shure MV7, but I definitely prefer the absolute no logo look of the SM7B. Obviously, they're updating it for the streaming and video podcast era when microphones are on camera a lot more. You got to get that brand recognition in, and it does kind of look like it's a little decal, so part of me is kind of wondering, can we get rid of that? But I'm not sure I want to do that because I think I'm going to be returning this microphone. And that's really what I want to touch on in this introduction conclusion here is this is a fantastic microphone. The SM7DB is a great sounding microphone. You're listening to me on it through the Rodecaster Pro 2. I do have my special SM7B preset that I put together on, and if I turn that off, this is what it sounds like just straight out of the box and just totally flat profile. If you want to know what those little switches do, this is the presence boost, so this is now with the presence boost. It basically bumps up those mids. I'm not really a fan of how this sounds, and this is with the bass cut. So now if you have low rumbling in your environment or really deep voice, this would cut out some of those frequencies, but I can bring those frequencies back in here. And if I turn on the bass cut and the presence boost, this is it's not the sound that I would like. So I like to keep that flat and then just add in EQ through the Rodecaster or through software or whatever. But this is the microphone with no EQ. I am running 28 decibels of gain into the Rodecaster at 26 decibels of internal gain over there. So this is an absolutely great sounding microphone, just like the SM7B. It is the SM7B, just with a built-in booster. And the reason I'm returning mine is not because it's bad, but because I think my expectations were not in line with what it actually is. I was under the impression when they announced this microphone, and then I ordered it like right away, super excited, what I was expecting was the SM7B's sound, but with a much quieter signal because of the built-in preamp. So I was like, oh wow, I can use my SM7B, but because it's got a built-in preamp and I'll need less gain on my interface and everything, I'm going to get a quieter signal. But as you can kind of hear right here, this is the SM7DB, again with no effects and no processing, and this is the SM7B, again with no effects and no processing. This has 56 decibels of gain. This has 26 decibels of gain. I don't know if you can hear it, but in my headphones, go from here. They kind of sound the same. It doesn't really seem to actually be any quieter. And so there's really no benefit in me having that microphone over this one. And it's $500. So I would like to have my $500 instead, I think. So the conclusion I've come up with is if you already have an SM7B and it's working for you, don't get the SM7DB. Don't buy the DB because it's not going to add anything to your setup that you don't already have. If you're using something like a newer generation Rode item like the Rodecaster Pro 2, the Rodecaster Duo, or the Rode Streamer X, any of these new Rode things that have the Revolution preamps in them, which have 76 decibels of clean gain, don't get this microphone because the Revolution preamps are more than enough to drive the SM7B, and it's just as clean, if not even a little cleaner, than adding the boost from the SM7DB. The same would be true if you have any other mixer or interface that has 70-ish or more decibels of gain, like the Focusrite Vocasters 1 and 2 that have 69 or 70 decibels of gain, more than enough for the original SM7B. The Boss Gigcaster has more than enough gain for the SM7B, the original without a booster. And the Mackie DLZ Creator has 80 decibels of gain, so more than enough for the SM7B. And the new 4th generation Focusrite Scarletts also have more than enough gain to run the SM7B. So you really don't need this microphone if you're using any of those kinds of interfaces. The only time I would really recommend getting the DB if you already have an SM7B is if you're using your SM7B with a booster and you really don't like using it with a booster, which I totally get because boosters can be a hassle. It's another thing you have to keep track of. Oftentimes it involves using a second cable or a patch cable, and that can just be a little annoying. And every time you introduce another thing or another cable into your setup, it is a potential point of failure. So if you just want to eliminate that and have the built-in booster of the microphone, I think that's a very valid reason. You could get the original SM7B for $399 and an inexpensive booster like the Clark Technic CT1 for about $40, and then the boosted SM7B, which now is exactly the same as the DB, is significantly cheaper, like $60 cheaper than the SM7DB, but having the booster built in and not needing anything else is a really nice quality of life upgrade. So I get that. If you really, really dislike using a booster with your SM7B, this is a good way to ditch the booster, to boost your happiness without an external booster. And the other times I would recommend the SM7DB is if you're using an interface with a weaker preamp. So like the Focusrite Scarlett's 1st through 3rd generations, they usually need a booster with an SM7B, so this would be a great mic for those. If you're using more of a music-centric mixer, because if you're miking up a guitar cabinet or a drum set, you really don't need a lot of gain to get a good signal, so these usually don't have a lot of clean gain, and you usually do need boosters with the SM7B, so the DB would be a great companion with these. Even the original Rodecaster out there tops out at 55 decibels of gain, so right now as I'm using the original SM7B at 56 decibels of gain, this signal could not be done on that original Rodecaster without a booster, and I still have 20 more decibels I could push it through on the Rodecaster Pro 2. And the last thing I would recommend using the SM7B for is, wait, before I tell you, let me actually try it. So now you're listening to me on the SM7DB running directly into my Sony FX3 with nothing else, just microphone directly into the audio handle of the camera because it has 2 XLR inputs and the audio handle can provide phantom power. So the mic booster is actually only on 18 decibels and the camera's gain is set to about 3. So that's pretty low and this should sound pretty clear. But I think it's really cool that I can get a decent signal using 18 decibels, not even the full booster of the microphone directly into the camera. So this is a great use of this microphone. And think about if you had 2 of these, since the FX3's audio handle has 2 inputs, you could do a really easy remote portable video podcast setup. You just got 2 microphones, they go straight into the camera, and you're done. You don't need any boosters, you don't need any external recorders or mixers or anything. That could be a really versatile, really awesome setup to use. And now back on the Rodecaster Pro 2 with the SM7DB, those are the situations where I think you would want an SM7B, and that doesn't actually bring into play a couple of other things like the Blue Sona, which is very similar. It's almost the same microphone. It's an SM7B style and sounding microphone with a built-in booster that retails for $350, $150 cheaper than this, and that doesn't even touch then on the SE Dynacaster, which is another dynamic microphone that has a built-in booster. I don't have one, but that retails for under $300. So that would mean that the person that the SM7DB is for, I think, is a very specific person. It would be somebody who wants an SM7B, not something else, not kind of an SM7B. They want an actual SM7B, but they either don't have or won't be for some reason running it into a higher end mixer interface or preamp that has enough clean gain built right into it. But for everybody else, the original is probably still just fine. And if you just want a good sounding dynamic microphone, even with one with a built-in booster, there are other great options out there for less money. So for me, that's why I won't be keeping the SM7DB. As much as I was so excited about it, I really wanted to keep it. And it is a great microphone. It does everything that it says it's going to do. I guess I just kind of hoped it would do a little more. Let's go over here to the Shure SM7B and let's turn on my SM7B preset so you can hear it how I like it to sound on my voice. This microphone is a pretty darn legendary microphone. The SM7B as we know it, this one right here was released in 2001, so it's been around for a while. The original microphone, the Shure SM7, was released in 1973, and then it wasn't really updated until 1998, 1999. They updated a little bit with the SM7A, and then in 2001, added a few more updates, and that's the SM7B that we have all been familiar with over all of these years. So that is a long time. Essentially, it's been relatively unchanged for about half a century. And I think that's a testament to how good this microphone is, but I think it's important to remember that when it was released, even the most recent version in 2001, it was intended to be used in professional environments, studios, and broadcast stations that all had plenty of equipment and plenty of audio engineers to operate this microphone and make it sound its absolute best. As time went on, it was kind of co-opted by, home podcasters and streamers and content creators. Then you were taking this, what was intended to be a studio-grade microphone, and running it through a bunch of consumer-grade equipment, and that's where it started to become known as a microphone that's sort of difficult to work with because it needs so much gain and it's just so quiet. So with all of that in mind, I think it makes sense that Shure would want to update that microphone to be more compatible with all of the consumer and prosumer level equipment that so many of their customers are using the microphone with. And that's where the SM7DB comes into play. And just like the original, the SM7DB does come with the original windscreen. I like to put the reporterstore.com ones on there. That I'm not affiliated with them in any way, by the way. I just buy a lot of windscreens from them, but they're really cool and they're super fun. And I like being able to sort of customize the microphone because you can't spell custom without Tom. Anyway, it also comes with this big fat windscreen, just like the original did, which really helps tame down plosives and wind sound, although the SM7B is a microphone that is really known for not being super susceptible to plosives. Peter Piper pitched a podcast. Even if I take my windscreen off, Peter Piper pitched a podcast, because you have the capsule way down here and you have this metal grill that's already acting as a windscreen even when nothing is on the microphone. But if I pop this one on there, then Peter Piper pitched a plosive producing podcast. When I was setting up SM7Bs in podcasting setups for school districts and like educational programs and things, I always used the big fat windscreen because when you had a bunch of students and staff and teachers and things who just weren't familiar with microphones, this was the easiest one for them to deal with without sounding bad. But then the rest of the time I liked using the regular windscreen because I do like the way that this looks. So now while we're talking about this microphone, I think obviously it makes sense to compare it to the original SM7B. Let's do a few things here though. So for the past few minutes, you've been listening to me on my SM7B preset and the Rodecaster Pro 2. So now I have turned off the preset, but I've also turned off the preamp and I just boosted the gain up to 56 decibels, which is the level that works best for me on the SM7B in the Rodecaster Pro 2 or the Rodecaster Duo as well. And this is what that sounds like. So basically, this is now just a regular SM7B. I'm not using that new booster at all. And just to show you that, here is the original SM7B with the exact same settings, 56 decibels of gain, no processing. It's the SM7B. It's the SM7DB. They're basically, I think any difference in sound might come from my positioning and not necessarily the microphones having a different sound quality. Although, it's probably worth noting that when you do use the booster built into the SM7DB and you have all of that gain, it does mean you can be a little further away from the microphone. Let me show you. So I turn on that booster and I keep my 56 decibels of gain. I can be really far away from the microphone. This doesn't sound that great, but I could turn that down maybe to like 38 decibels of gain. And you can still hear some background, but I'm way further away than you would normally be with an SM7B. And it seems like I'm getting a very similar sound as to when I'm pretty close to the SM7B over here, but I can be further away from the DB. You're going to pick up more room tone because I'm further away from the microphone, but it's kind of cool that you can get that SM7B sound without having to be right on top of the microphone. So that is maybe one way that they do sound a little different, is the added gain allows you to have maybe a little more distance between the microphone, but there's also a lot more noise in this. So we're going to go back to the bypass mode for a second. Now we're back on the SM7DB with no booster, and we're at 56 decibels of gain, and the original SM7B, of course, with no booster and 56 decibels of gain. So they are exactly the same. Let's hear if we can hear a difference in the noise floor between them. So I will switch between the microphones and I'll point to which one's active, and you can hear if you notice a difference in the noise floor or the hiss. So we're going to start with this one here, the SM7B. So I don't really notice a difference. I don't know if you did, or if you could hear it through your headphones differently than I could with mine. I don't really notice a difference there, which there shouldn't be. In that mode, there shouldn't be a difference. It should be the exact same microphone. But now I have the booster turned on, phantom power, so I only have 26 decibels of gain in the Rodecaster Pro 2 and 28 decibels of gain on the SM7DB over here, and I haven't changed any of my settings for the original SM7B. So let's hear how the noise floor differs between the SM7DB with the booster and the SM7B without the booster, starting with the DB. I don't know if you can hear it, and it might just be my headphone amps. I feel like they're very, very similar. If anything, the DB being slightly noisier, which is strange because I'm using less gain in the Rodecaster. But if you remember when Rode came out with those Revolution preamps and all the current generation products, they said that if you added a booster to it, the preamps were so clean that a booster would actually introduce noise into the signal. And I did an entire video where I put that claim to the test and found it to be true. Not just marketing hullabaloo, but actually it was true. So that makes me think then, if you're using a microphone like the SM7DB or the Blue Sona or the Dynacaster with one of the Revolution preamp Rode products, that you're going to end up potentially getting a noisier signal than if you're using a dynamic microphone just boosted up with the internal gain. That was really what I was hoping. I was hoping I could have this setup right here, 26 decibels, you know, really low gain here, ultra clean SM7B sound without needing any processing or anything. And it just kind of was the same as what I had before. Now, I guess we could switch over to 18 decibels, and then I can boost this up to, I guess I'd have to be like 38 decibels now to get a signal here. And this is what it sounds like on the DB going over to the SM7B. In this case, with the SM7DB's booster at the lowest setting, 18 decibels, and my Rodecaster's gain boosted up to compensate for that, this noise floor is way louder than the SM7B's is just at 56 decibels of gain. Again, this is the DB. And now we're back on the DB with 26 decibels dBs of gain over here. So you can maybe kind of see why I and others who have this sort of setup, a Rodecaster setup, wanted to dive into a new updated SM7B. Were a little bit disappointed because it didn't really bring anything new, and in some cases actually degraded the audio quality, even though the price was upgraded. So that's a little disappointing. So let's move on to a few other comparisons. Obviously, the original SM7B, and something else I should mention is it's just as good at rejecting handling noise. One of the best features about the SM7Bs is that they just don't really pick up handling noise very much at all. They have like such great internal shock rejection that you can move the microphone around and it's not an issue. It's something you don't appreciate until you don't have it. So if you used an SM7B for a long time and then you switch to another microphone, sometimes it can kind of be jarring when you touch the microphone, you hear like every sound. The SM7Bs are just so good at not having that problem. But let's move on to a few other comparisons. Originally, I asked for a whole bunch of suggestions and requests for comparisons, and I was really excited about it, but now realizing that it's just the same as the SM7B, if not a little noisier in some situations, I'm going to do a few select comparisons in this video. But if you want to hear sort of all of my microphones on both a male and a female voice, my wife and I did a huge comparison video that includes the original SM7B, so it's the same sound quality compared to all the other mics, again, on a male and a female voice. Check that video out if you want the full breadth of comparisons. But for now, I think just to make you not have to click on another video, there are a few microphones that it does make sense to compare the SM7DB to. The first of which being this one right here, which is the Blue Sona. This microphone came out in fall of 2022, and when it was released and I made a video about it, I called it the SM7B for everyone because it was a little bit less expensive than the regular SM7B at $349 versus $399, and it has a built-in booster, so you don't need, it's the same benefits as the SM7DB. You don't need anything else to use the microphone with, and I think it's a great sounding microphone that takes a lot of the cues from the Shure. You have a metal grill over here. It's easy to change windscreens. It even comes with one different colored and one black windscreen. The microphone itself does come in black, so if you want the classic black on black look, you can get that with the Blue Sona. I like this one. And even the Reporter Store windscreens fit on here okay, even though they're not the exact right shape. The biggest difference between the Blue Sona and the Shure SM7DB is that the Sona does not let you select how much gain you can use. The SM7DB is the first microphone I've seen that lets you actually choose different levels of gain, which is really, really cool. But just for reference, this is 26 decibels of gain, the exact same settings as I have on the SM7DB. This is the Blue Sona, and this is the Shure SM7DB. So even though there are other active microphones like the SE Dynacaster out there, I really view the Sona as the biggest SM7B competitor because I think the sound profile is really similar. So again, this is me on the SM7DB, and this is me on the Blue Sona. In my review of the Sona, I did a blind sound comparison, a blind sound taste test between this and the SM7B, and the overwhelming majority of people actually preferred the Blue Sona against the Shure, again with no processing and no EQ, but you can hear that they sound very, very similar. Whereas something like the SE Dynacaster it has much more of a signature sound profile. Again, I don't have one, but it almost has a condenser mic type style to it, which sounds great, but it's like its own thing. So big question you have to ask yourself is, would you be okay paying $350 for the Blue Sona? Or if you want all these features, do you want to fork over $500 for the SM7DB? And if we listen to those noise floors, I'm hearing that it sounds, let's hear. So here's the Sona. I'm noticing that the Sona seems to be significantly quieter than the SM7DB does. But of course, one thing to keep in mind is now you're talking about Blue Logitech. Is Blue a company anymore? I don't know. They were like absorbed by Logitech. I don't know if they exist. And then you're talking about Shure, which has just been Shure for like almost a century at this point. And I think that is valuable. I think there is something to that when you're like, okay, this is a great microphone, but is this company going to be absorbed into some other company? Not that it's going to affect the performance of the microphone, but it's really nice sometimes just go like, these people are making this microphone or a version of this microphone forever, and I just want that microphone and those components and that engineering and that design and that peace of mind that comes with it, I think is a reason to choose a Shure branded microphone over another brand. But that doesn't mean every Shure microphone is perfect. So let's move on to our next comparison, which is the Shure MV7. Right now running at 46 decibels of gain. This is a dynamic microphone with no booster, so there's no phantom power or anything, just 46 decibels of gain, and the SM7DB at 26 decibels of gain. Now, I said that no microphone is perfect. The MV7 over here is a really great microphone, but you can probably notice right away it's picking up a little bit more handling noise than the SM7B does. And Peter Piper pitched a podcast. My biggest complaint with this microphone that I've said since it's released is the windscreen that comes with it is very prone to plosive problems. Fortunately, you can just put an SM7B windscreen on, and then those plosive problems are pronouncedly they're better. The plosives are better when you do it this way, and it is a great sounding microphone. It's not exactly the same as an SM7B, and I think when Shure was promoting this, they were really kind of marketing it as like it's a USB SM7B because the MV7 is an XLR USB combo mic. So right now I'm using it as an XLR microphone, but I could plug it in via USB and even run through the Shure Motive app, which I did my full review on this. And it's a really great microphone. It's a good one for people to choose if you want to leap into the world of a high quality microphone, USB only setup, and then if you get an interface or a mixer down the line, you know that you're going to have a microphone that you can grow with because then you can just use XLR with it. The downside here is it uses micro USB instead of USB-C, which doesn't make any sense. It really should be USB-C in the back, not micro. That's my biggest complaint. Plosives, micro USB, and handling noise. Otherwise, the MV7 is a terrific sounding microphone, and it is $249. It's a much more affordable microphone, and it sounds almost the same as the SM7B, just not quite as neutral and not quite as smooth, but it's still a great sounding microphone. But now if you want a Shure microphone for the least amount of money possible, let's jump over here to the Shure SM58 running at 43 decibels of gain. Probably if you talk to someone who doesn't know anything about a microphone and you ask them to like draw a microphone, they'll probably draw something that looks like this. This is the microphone emoji that pops up in your emoji keyboard, is an SM58 style microphone. It can be a handheld microphone. You can mount it somewhere. It's incredibly versatile. I'm running it at 43 decibels of gain, 44 decibels of gain now with no effects and no processing. This is the Shure SM58, and this is the Shure SM7DB. They have very similar sounds. And the really cool part is that this SM58 right here has a retail price of $99. So this is the least expensive, I believe it's the least expensive Shure microphone you can buy. I'm not sure about that, but I think it's true. And it sounds very, very close to the SM7B or the SM7DB. Definitely close enough that if you have an SM7B as your main mic and you have like a guest mic sometime or a co-host sometimes, but you don't want to invest in another SM7B or DB, you could definitely get by with the SM58 and mix the two together, and it's going to sound just great. And again, this is with no effects and no processing. What would it sound like if I put my SM7B preset on the 58? I don't know that I like it as much as I do on the SM7B, but this is with processing and this is without processing on the Shure SM58. But now jumping up in price significantly to about $449, this is the Electro Voice RE20. The reason that this makes a lot of sense to compare to the SM7B, in fact I have a whole video that does exactly that, is because this is actually an older microphone than the original SM7 was. This came out in 1969, I believe, is when the RE20 was released, and it has a very distinct sound. It's a very popular microphone, and here is the Shure SM7DB. One of the big differences, you can hear the Shure almost, when you listen to them back to back, almost sounds kind of muddy, and that's because this one is made to be flat and neutral, and then you do what I do right here, and you add in your processing and your EQ to dial it into your specific voice and your specific environment, which is something that really just about every microphone kind of needs. So this is the SM7DB with processing, and again, this is the SM7DB without processing. And this is the Electro Voice RE20 without processing. It has a much more distinct, characterized sound, I guess, just straight away than the SM7B does. Oh, however, it is very susceptible to plosives. Peter Piper pitched a podcast, so I have to have this little pop filter on here to prevent plosives. And as you probably noticed, even from the cable moving around, it is very susceptible to handling noise as well. So it needs to be in a nice shock mount. And, you know, it's a little more work, but it's a really great sounding microphone. And depending on your voice, because finding the right microphone, as I've said many times, is all about what sounds good on your specific voice. So anyway, this is the Electro Voice RE20. And this is the Shure SM7DB. And now this is the Samson Q9U, which you can just tell by its design. By its design, you can see that the Q9U is very, very heavily inspired by the SM7B. This microphone is several years old at this point, but just like the MV7, it's an XLR USB combo microphone and has the added benefit of having USB-C for its USB functionality, although I'm using it as an XLR microphone right now with no processing at 37 decibels of gain. So the RE20 I had to have up at 56 decibels, just like the SM7B, and the Q9U I can run quieter at 37 decibels. So this is the Q9U, and this is the SM7DB over here. This is the Shure SM7DB. And this is the Samson Q9U. So it's a good microphone that's potentially a great alternative to the SM7B if you're open to not having a Shure microphone. So as we continue down this road of mic comparisons, it would be unfair not to include Rode. This is the Rode PodMic USB, which sounds very similar to the original PodMic that had a retail price of $99 and is still available. This one has a retail price of $199 because it also adds in USB USB-C functionality, which is really nice, and you can use all of Rode's DSP signal processing in their apps and everything. So this is the PodMic USB, and this is the Shure SM7DB running into the Rodecaster Pro 2. No effects and no processing. The first thing you're going to notice right away is that the DB sounds fuller, richer, maybe even potentially a little muddier compared to the PodMic USB, which sounds a lot more crisp and leans more towards the high ends, which is actually something I've grown to not like about pod mics over the years, because it's just sort of seems like they really need to have those high ends tamed, whereas the Shure microphones are much more balanced, and then you can just add in just a little bit of EQ and processing to really make them sing with just about any voice. And that's a nice thing with the SM7B and the DB, is they will sound, they're an easy microphone to have sound great on a wide variety of voices. Now, continuing down this road, this is the Rode Procaster running into my Rode Rodecaster Pro, because that's not confusing at all. This is, I don't know if it's fair to say this because there are some other models out there, but I would say, generally speaking, the Procaster is Rode's most similar offering to an SM7B. But the good news there is that its retail price is significantly lower at like $229 versus $399 or $500. It's a dynamic microphone. Right now I'm running it at 47 decibels of gain with no effects and no processing. This is the Rode Procaster, and this is the Shure SM7DB. The Procaster, I think, definitely has more of a pronounced characteristic sound right out of the box versus the neutral sound here. I think both of them sound great. You might notice that the Procaster is more prone to plosives, so you definitely need a windscreen. The little RE20 pop filter fits on here too, which is really nice. The really downside to the Procaster, and why I don't find myself using it as much as I might like to, is that it's a giant microphone. It's big and it's heavy, and mounting it in a convenient way can sometimes just be a little difficult, and it's a great sounding microphone at a really great price. And to go in sort of a different direction now, this is the Rode NT1 5th generation, which is also an XLR USB combo microphone that sounds just the same as the Rode NT1 that came out before it, but it is also that's a really great sounding microphone that just, it is very susceptible to plosives. It comes with a little pop filter windscreen, which is incredibly helpful, and a really nice shock mount as well, so you wouldn't normally be hand holding it like this. I think this is a really lovely sounding microphone. It is a condenser, so I have phantom power, and it is at 25 decibels of gain versus the 26 decibels of gain over here on the SM7DB. And this might be interesting. Let's turn the NT1 up to 26 decibels and compare the noise floors between a dynamic and condenser, but both running on phantom power. So starting with the SM7DB. There we go. And now back over here on the Shure NT1 5th generation, I absolutely love the way that this microphone sounds. I have nothing bad to say about the sound of this microphone. It's absolutely fantastic. My only criticisms that I had in my review of it is that the USB functionality is pretty limited, because you can just kind of plug it in and there's no USB controls anywhere on the microphone, not even a headphone output, which is not particularly helpful. But as an XLR microphone, it is just a beautiful sounding microphone. And speaking of beautiful sounding condenser microphones, this is one of my favorites. This is the Lewitt LCT 240 Pro. This has a retail price of $139. It is a very affordable microphone. It's a condenser, so it needs phantom power. But this is the Lewitt LCT 240 Pro, and this is the Shure SM7DB. Very different. You can hear sort of almost stereotypical condenser versus dynamic sounds. They're both great sounding microphones, but for the price, it's really hard to beat this Lewitt. I absolutely love the sound of this, and every time I do sort of a big mic showdown and a big mic voting thing, this one usually ends up winning, like the brackets that I set up and stuff, because it's an awesome microphone. And while we are talking about really great condenser microphones, I want to definitely include the Earthworks Icon Pro. This is not as affordable as the Lewitt LCT 240 Pro, because this is $499. This is a significantly more expensive condenser microphone, right now running at 23 decibels of gain, compared to the SM7DB's 26 decibels of gain with the booster. Of course, condenser microphone needs phantom power. So this is the Shure SM7DB, and this is the Earthworks Icon Pro, which has just a great kind of classic condenser sound. Definitely a little crisp, a little towards the high end, but a really nice sounding microphone that then reminds me of one of my other all-time favorite microphones, which is the Earthworks Ethos, and this now retails for the exact same price as the original SM7B, $399. I love this microphone. It's such a great sounding microphone. Prior to having an SM7B option with a built-in booster, I thought this was a great way to sort of get that sound without needing external boosters. Even though this and the Icon are condenser microphones, I don't feel like they pick up significantly more room tone or anything than a microphone like the Shure SM7DB does. We could do a noise floor test, so we'll start with the Shure over here. I don't feel like you need a significantly more well sound treated space to use the Earthworks Ethos than you do the Shure SM7DB or SM7B. I think it's a terrific sounding microphone. And again, this is the SM7DB in comparison, which definitely does kind of shine a little bit more once you add some EQ to it. That's going to kind of wrap up the comparison portion of this video. Again, check out the super in-depth every microphone I have comparison on both male and female voice if you kind of want a little bit more of that in a little bit more depth. But to wrap things up here, again, this is the Shure SM7B, no effects and no processing, and this is the Shure SM7DB, no effects and no processing, 26 decibels versus 56 decibels. Now let's turn on some of that processing. So if I add my SM7B preset over here to the SM7DB, this is what that sounds like once I've EQ'd it in a way that I like for my voice, and this is what the SM7B sounds like once I've EQ'd it in a way that I like for my voice. They sound exactly the same because, again, they're basically the same microphone. One just has a booster and one doesn't. So because of that, that kind of brings me to the conclusion that's at the end of the video instead of the beginning of the video. The SM7B is not in any way outdated because of the SM7DB. The SM7DB brings in a bit of new functionality and makes it more accessible to more setups, because now you can take this microphone and you can connect it to any interface or mixer that has phantom power, and it's going to be able to sound great. But the issue there is that it's a $500 microphone, and a lot of the newer interfaces and mixers, like all the Rode stuff and the Focusrite stuff and all the things, can run the SM7B without the need for a booster anymore. So again, I'm not at all saying that this is a bad microphone. It's a great microphone, but it, I think, serves a very specific niche person, somebody who's going to be using it with a very limited interface or wants to run it directly into a camera and that's it, and they want the SM7B. That's who this is for. Otherwise, the SM7B can just keep being as good as it's always been, or you could go with another option like the Blue Sona or the SC Dynacast or any of the other microphones that I've shown in this or other videos. So as long as you understand that when you get the SM7DB and your expectations are kind of leveled to the point that you expect the microphone to do what it's supposed to do and nothing more, I think you'll be very happy with it. But if you have an SM7B setup and you think this is going to somehow make it better, it probably won't, and you'll probably be better off just sticking with your original microphone. And speaking of things that are worth sticking with, thank you to everyone who helps support my channel through Patreon and YouTube channel memberships. I really appreciate it. And again, I keep talking about it, but if you want to hear all of the microphones on a male and a female voice, basically the most in-depth mic comparison video I've ever made, check out this video right here.